our very first panel of day one. I see we're just getting started. A couple of minor changes. Water, I think, is still being served. Of course, this is a session. Yes, please come on stage by all means. And this first panel is titled Investing for Europe, a priority agenda for Europe to adapt to a changing world. So a very, very timely topic, a lot of themes that Dr. Werner Hoyer has already provided us with, I'm sure will be picked up here and taken a deeper dive. To guide us through this session, I'm delighted to introduce the Vice President of the European Investment Bank, Ms. Gelsomina Vigliotti, who will be moderating this panel. Gelsomina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this panel that I'm very proud to moderate. The issue that we will talk this afternoon, it's very much relevant. It's the start of our today's journey toward this big team that we have that is adapting to a changing world. And actually what we want to focus this afternoon is to what we can do to promote and foster investment in Europe. Actually, I will follow an alphabetical order, but in the end, I think that the sequence of intervention, I think it's wise, since we will start with Minister Eurico Baques, the finance minister of Luxembourg, and we will have the view coming from a policymaker, from a minister. After that, we will have the view by a national promotional bank, Mr. Paweł Borys, who is the president of the management board of the Polish Development Fund, and actually the perspective of a national promotional institution to what can be done in support of government. And then we have an international organization. We have Mariette Falkstedt, who is the chief executive of the European Investment Fund, who is very much involved in providing support to SMEs for investment, for providing guarantees, equity, and debt. And then central banks. You know how relevant are central banks, especially these days, and having the view also from a central banker, from Mr. Pablo Hernández de Cos, the governor of the Banco de España. I think that it's very relevant. I do not want to spend too many words about this session, but just let me remind that the issue of the investment in Europe is not much relevant because of the current juncture, how relevant it is, but it's an old problem, I would say, already before the crisis, investment in Europe lagged behind, for instance, investment in the US by something like 2%. Also in terms of productivity, we lagged behind. So I think that, we are confronting in Europe this issue of the investment in a very forceful way for some decades now. And now with the double crisis, the triple crisis, I would say, by COVID, by the war, by the energy, I think that we have a real challenge to which we have to respond. I will start then with the Minister Baques. We know that Luxembourg enjoys a very high GDP, maybe it's the highest GDP per capita of the EU, low employment, also a very rich public assets country, but at the same time, it's a country who has to defend this position, and he has to deal with competition coming from outside. So I would like to ask you, how do you see, the situation of your country and of the European countries with respect to this competitive environment, and in particular with a special focus maybe on how to preserve, the financial sector in your country and to, promote it?
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Werner Hoyer and the EIB for organizing this forum, which I think comes really at a very timely time to discuss with so many important people these challenges that we are facing. Indeed, you said it, we are in a difficult situation, very complex time with multiple crises, polycrisis or permacrisis, whatever we want to call it. And I think we really need to try to have a comprehensive approach really to, you mentioned the investment gap, we need to address it. At the same time, we need to make sure that the fiscal space that member states have is also sustainable in the long run. And of course, the regulatory framework that we have, it needs to be rigorous, but at the same time flexible. And I think we see with multiple crises, every crisis we have had, the reflexes are always national, the reflexes are protectionist, and after every crisis we see that the solutions are European. Sometimes we come to this conclusion perhaps slightly a bit late, but better late than never, and I think in this situation it's again like that. You asked me about the situation in Luxembourg. Yes, we are operating in a very competitive environment, and I think it's important to be able to provide a business environment that we are able to provide in Luxembourg that continues to be oriented internationally, that is multicultural, multilingual, that provides for stability, that provides for predictability, because if we want investments, that is what investors are also looking for. And I think at the basis of the success also of Luxembourg will always be the EU's internal market also for financial services. This is fundamental for us. This is the basis to have common standards, to have common rules, to have a well-regulated financial center. It's essential. And we need to be forward-looking, and I think we are trying to create, for example, in our business community, a fintech community that is very important and that is not in competition with actors, banking actors, as was the case maybe for many years. No, this is win-win if they can be successful in an international financial center. We need to have a long-term vision concerning sustainable finance, and there we are really very active. Labeling agency, LuxFlag is a very important part. The stock exchange with the world's first green stock exchange. We host 40% of bonds that are sustainable. So this all creates an environment, I think, where there are many actors, many important actors, and where there is confidence and trust in a system that works, and where investing is really future-oriented. And we do that, of course, very often also together with the EIB. Many examples for that. Perhaps I can revert to that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Backes, for your remarks. And now I would like to ask Mr. Boris about the experience of the Polish Development Fund. We know that your fund played an important role during the COVID crisis by providing support to the financial sector, to the SMEs and to large enterprises. Now you cope in Poland, like in other European countries, also with the spillovers by the war in Ukraine, by the energy crisis. And so, I mean, what is the response that you are developing to these new challenges? And in particular, what challenges do you see in particularly in the central and eastern countries of the European Union?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today during EIB Forum. In Central and Eastern Europe countries continues its convergence path, and actually over the last 3 decades we've been able to significantly increase productivity and level of incomes, which currently stays around 80% of European Union average. So still the region represents significant catch-up potential. The region proved to be pretty resilient during different crises over the last 2-3 decades, especially Poland and Czech Republic. However, I must say that this time is really different, and this situation in the global economy with the war in Ukraine, in Europe, represent completely different challenges, and of course, countries such Poland are afraid not to lose this growth path, this convergence path this time. And of course, the situation represents some important challenges, but also some opportunities. And if we look at the risk and the consequences of the war, energy crisis, and COVID in the region, we need to see that all countries have significant current account deficit, 3-4% of GDP. So because of the deterioration of terms of trade, we observed last year especially some capital flight from the region after the start of the war, and the access to credit has deteriorated, and all the countries, because very high inflation, has to raise rates significantly. In Poland, we have 6.75% reference rate of the central bank. More than 1 year ago, the rates were close to zero. So this is very significant hit for households and businesses, which we have to deal with. We also observed lower dynamics of investment, and due to negative real incomes, we see slower consumption. So now we are in the slowdown as the rest of Europe. However, we also see some opportunities coming from the situation in the global economy. One important trend is nearshoring. The region is still highly competitive, and it has well-educated workforce. So we see a strong pipeline of investment connected with the trend of shortening supply chain. In automotive, this paradigm of just in time was replaced by just in case. So we see that these investments are more driven by security reason, and the whole region is quite attractive place to invest. If I would like to mention one priority for the region for investment is interconnectivity. Historically, the whole transportation network was west-east. It was called Danube strategy, so there was very little interconnectivity within the region. I mean, railways, roads, energy connections. It is easier to come from Warsaw to Paris than from Warsaw to Bucharest. So one of the priority for the region is to invest heavily in better interconnectivity from ports on the Baltic Sea through roads, railway connections from north to east, from Sweden, Finland, Baltic countries, Poland, to Romania, Hungary, Croatia, to improve the interconnections in energy and pipes, to fully utilize the growth potential in the region, because I believe that sea could not only be, relatively attractive and competitive, cheap place for investment, but it could also be a driver of economic prosperity of the whole Europe. And of course, there is a significant role to play in this for local promotional banks. In Poland, we have conducted over the last few years significant reform of local development institutions. We have development fund, we have strong development bank, we have trade and invest agency and export insurance agency. And we are not only very active during COVID, but now we are very active in promoting development of the capital market, venture capital private equity markets as a strong cornerstone investor for such a funds. We have created new capital pillar of the pension system to foster long-term savings in the economy. And of course, we are very much involved in different investment in energy transition. In Poland, for example, we have very huge projects on the Baltic Sea in offshore wind farm. So this requires significant resources, and our institutions are capable to close some market gaps, financing gaps which exist in the markets, especially if we are talking about risk capital and long-term capital.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boris. I think that we can come back at the next round on some critical aspects that you underlined. But now, Mr. Falkest, how the EIF, how an international organization can respond and can contribute to the challenges that everyone is facing, and you know, the way in which the national governments and the national promotional banks are coping with. What could be what could be the contribution by the European Investment Fund?
Thank you very much. I think first it is important to understand as EIF is part of the European Investment Bank group, and as a group we have the possibility, when we talk for example about corporates, to finance the full lifetime of a company, starting from the seed of a startup, over growing, scaling, and then really the mature corporates through the different products that we have. Now, how we do it in the EIF? The EIF can only do it thanks to other people's money, because we are receiving mandates from the European Commission, from the member states, from the EIB. We can combine these resources and make the best out of it in order to attract, in fact, private sector investment. This is what we want to do. We want to finance private sector. And how we do it then? Once we have this funding, we do it through equity or guarantee products, which we are having. Why is it important to combine funding and combine also funding, for example, under the Resilience and Recovery Facility or the structural funds together with the InvestEU, so European Union budget money? It's important because like this, we can achieve much more. There's a huge leverage effect. For example, last year, the EIF signed, we deployed something like 9.2 billion euros, and we expect that there will be 100 billion of investment achieved. This is huge, and this is very important in the European Union. Where I think also where we can play a role, we can be a bit bad guy, because we have here policymakers, and we can tell them the stories where we see where the markets do not function. And I can tell you that what we hear out there is that, please, policymakers, implement first what you had done until so far. Don't make new regulations, don't make new criteria and no new eligibilities. And this is very important, because if we really want to see the impact of current regulatory framework that we have, let's implement it properly. Also in the context of Capital Markets Union, the President was referring to the Banking Union. Let's make that first happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariot, for this observation, and I think that this flows well with the next speaker, with Mr. Hernández de Cosa, the governor of the Bank of Spain. Actually, tomorrow we will have the presentation of the investment survey, and one of the issues that we will see within this report is the lack of finance, or the difficulty of access to finance for some type of enterprises. So I was wondering if from the perspective of a central banker, what you see as the main obstacles, the main constraint for funding long-term project in the European Union, and also if you can provide your view with respect what could be the major investment needs for the next years and in the long term to foster the growth of the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I would like to stress at least three main elements that I consider as absolutely crucial in order for Europe to guarantee that there is the financial environment that it is adequate for the investment needs that you were mentioning. The first one, being a central banker, you may not be surprised that I have to put at the forefront macroeconomic stability. So we are in a context which is very different to the one that we were observing just some years ago. Inflation is very high, and this is why in the European Central Bank, we are the Governing Council of the ECB, are acting expeditiously in order to fight against this high inflation. And of course, we have to guarantee that price stability, our objective is met, and of course, we will do so. This is absolutely crucial. We all know that price stability is a prerequisite for investment, for long-term growth. But it's not only about price stability, it's also about the fiscal sustainability. It's not that fiscal policy cannot play a certain role in the current environment. We've all tried to define this role as completely different to the one that was done by fiscal policy during the pandemic, and now confronted with this very high inflation environment. We all agree that fiscal policy should be targeted, should be temporary, should be consistent, in other words, with price stability. And in some countries, this is for sure the case of Spain, but of other European countries, public debt is high, structural deficits are also high, so there is also a need to guarantee that the fiscal consolidation process is started. And let's not forget, in this macro stability concept, that there is another third leg that it is very relevant, which is financial stability. The experience of the last 3 years, I think, has proven how important it is to have banks that are well capitalized, banks that have very sound balance sheets. There is plenty of evidence during the last 3 years on how those banks that were better capitalized, that have better or sound balance sheets, also were in a position to lend more. So this is one first thing that I wanted to emphasize. The second is we need also to preserve public investment. And this is going to be difficult this time, precisely because of these high public debt levels, because of these high structural deficits. We know from the experience of the last 2 decades that when a country has to initiate a fiscal consolidation process, the first item that it is adjusted is public investment. And we need to guarantee that this time is different. In this regard, I think it is relevant, for example, the proposal that has been made by the European Commission in terms of the review of the fiscal framework that tries precisely to create some incentives for this not happening. But of course, we all know that this won't be easy, because of course reducing public deficits is difficult. It's politically very, very complex. Social expenditure is always more difficult for politicians to reduce, to cut. And this time should be different, but we have to be careful that all those incentives are properly working and are used as intended. For sure, when talking about public investment, we have to talk about European public investment, because many of the needs, of the investment needs that have been mentioned here today, or even before by the EIB president, are European public goods, or even global public goods. So it makes a lot of sense that these are financed collectively. Of course, we have some instruments already. NGO funds are particularly relevant for those countries as Spain. And what we are emphasizing internally, domestically in Spain is, this combination of investment, public investment that tries also to crowd in private investment, and at the same time is made compatible or together with structural reforms that are very much needed. This combination could increase in a very significant manner long-term growth of the European economies. And then the third leg that I wanted to mention, and it was already mentioned by previous speakers, is of course starting by the fact that we know that Europe has not a unique capital market. We need a unique and single capital market. It's still a very fragmented capital market. And at the same time, we also know that the depth of this market is low as compared to other developed countries, in particular the US. This is an economy which is the role of the banking sector is much higher than in other jurisdictions, and this is not good for the economy. So we need to have a better mix of capital markets and banking. And for this, we also know the solutions, and some of them were already solved. Capital Market Union. This is, of course, one very important action plan that has already been defined, and now is the time for implementation. And of course, we cannot forget about Banking Union. We've done a lot of work on this, but there is still one missing element, which is the creation of a European deposit insurance scheme that it is common. I think with these three legs, macro stability on the one hand, preserving public investment second, and third, creating a real unique single capital market union and completing banking union, I think we will be in a much better position to finance all the investment needs that all this climate change transition, all the energy transition, all digitalization process that we all think that are completely needed for the European economy. We will be for sure in a much better position to do so.
Thank you very much, Governor, and thank you for for this palette of measures that you individuated to cope with the issue of investment and now to promote an environment favorable to invest under different point of view. And it was also interesting to see also geographically what could be some initiative which could be relevant in some parts of Europe, which are not necessarily the same in other parts. But there is an issue that maybe we didn't address yet, with the right emphasis, because actually it's important, especially as a continent, as a European Union. We have a clear, objective, a clear target with respect to the green transition. So I would start again with Governor Hernandez to see the way in which the green transition has been reflected also within the monetary policy decision, and the way in which it's the banking system and the monetary system can contribute to the green transition.
No, thank you very much. Well, of course. What I should emphasize from the very beginning is that the main role for this climate change transition is not for central banks, it's for fiscal policy. We know that, but this doesn't mean for sure that we cannot play a role. And let me perhaps stress the role that I think is more obvious, and which is the one related to banking supervision, banking regulation, financial regulation more in general. We all know that for this transition to happen, we need a change in relative prices in markets, in capital markets. At the same time, we know that this transition and also physical risk are real. So the obvious thing to do from the banking supervision side, or financial regulatory side, is of course to try to oblige to financial intermediaries to internalize, to endogenize the reality of this financial risk. And by doing so, of course, we will be in a position precisely to change relative prices in the direction that we want this to happen. And this is precisely what we are doing. So, as you may know, apart from being the governor of Banco de España, I'm also the chair of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision. And we started this task 3 years ago with a task force precisely exclusively devoted to this particular topic. And we are basically analyzing what we call Pillar 1, Pillar 2, and Pillar 3 of banking regulation and supervision. First, of course, we need data. This is why disclosure of information is so relevant, and we are working on the idea of having a specific disclosure of information by banks, that it is complementary to those that will be also for the rest of non-financial companies. This is the first thing that we are currently doing. Second, we are also working on Pillar 2, on supervisory measures. Here, stress testing, scenario analysis that help us precisely to understand well the magnitude of the problem. You may know that, for example, in the case of the SSM, we've already developed some stress test scenario with the participation of the banks. We've learned a lot about precisely how banks are in a position to manage the risk. We've identified many gaps that are clearly there, and we want to focus now on how to cover these gaps in the future. And we are also working on Pillar 1, which is regulatory measures. Here we have already given at the Basel Committee some indications on how the models, for example, that the banks are using and that have to be prudent enough, how this prudency rule should also try to incorporate the fact that the data, that the methodologies are still not sufficient in order precisely to incorporate, to endogenize this transition and physical risk. So changing the parameters of the models precisely to be prudent enough to incorporate this risk is also an indication that we've given, not only, of course, for Europe, but at the global level. No? So I think with this, I think we'll be in a position. We are, of course, not at the end of this journey. We are just starting. But I think in the following years, with the help of the financial sector, we'll be in a much better position for the banking sector, with the idea of guaranteeing financial stability, also promoting the transition to the green economy.
Thank you very much, Governor. And then, Mariott, actually the European Investment Fund very recently aligned itself with the policy of the European Investment Bank Group, which has a very clear climate roadmap, very clear and ambitious climate objectives. Can you tell us the way in which you can support the small and medium enterprises and fund of funds to promote green transition in Europe and outside Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, EIF started a new journey last year, and we have now public policy goals which are also related to climate, innovation, and so on. And when we were prudent in the beginning with 16%, the fund indeed succeeded in signing for agreements where the banks indicate that they could do approximately 22% of the portfolio in climate. Now, what is important? This is an intention, and we have to see indeed whether it can be deployed. So what is now very important also for the sake of our mandate, the European Commission, that the banks can show they can really use this for energy efficient or climate friendly investments then by the SMEs. That is important, and that is very interesting product that we are having, for example, under the InvestEU risk sharing product, guarantee product that we are deploying. Now, when we talk about climate, we talk about SMEs. Last year, the fund supported something like 377,000 SMEs. I think what is important for all of us is to bear in mind the question of proportionality. And this is something that we hear from the banks. And that is the question about how much can we put a burden on an SME indeed, when today they are more concerned about access to skilled labor or the high energy prices and the volatility of the energy prices than, for example, purchasing an electric vehicle, which would be then, of course, eligible under our guarantee product. So what I would plea here is that whatever we are doing in the form of SMEs and how we are, let's say, looking into SMEs, that we have a proportionate approach towards them. And when we look at the venture capital, I think here investors have a key role to play, and we are, of course, one of the investors. When we set standards, when investors ask for climate-friendly investments and climate-friendly actions, then the venture capitalists, of course, move towards this type of thinking. However, here again, we have to be proportionate because there are technology sectors like, let's take deep tech or life sciences. It might be very difficult, in fact, to achieve really climate targets. In that, the portion can be very small. So again, when we are working with the different products, guarantees or equity, we have to have this proportionality thinking in place. Also, we shall not think in sector-specific clusters, because there are so many cross-cutting topics between different clusters when we talk about now, let's say, space or life sciences, biotech, bioeconomy, and so on, that we have to always keep in mind a holistic view. I think that is important. But what we can do in the EIF, we can be the investor who is promoting those standards, those rules, guidance to the venture capitalists, and we can help develop markets in that way. There, I must add one point, and this is what Mr. President said already, President Hoyer. This was about the European Tech Champions Initiative, which is very important because this is one way also for European Union to develop markets, develop an area that has been underdeveloped so far. And this is indeed provide the relevant equity financing to companies who have passed their startup phase, innovative companies in a really fast-growing, scaling-up phase of their innovation, and going to the markets. And here, this initiative, 3.7 billion that is provided by very visionary member states, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Belgium. So far, hopefully others will follow. And of course, together with the EIB, I think here we can make a big, big change going forward. How this will impact then the climate and the sustainability targets needs to be seen.
Thank you, Mariot. Personally, I believe that in the end also, technological progress and innovation is also a great contribution to sustainability in a way or another. It's also a way to, to save resources, and I'm pretty confident that in the end, the two objectives of the technological sovereignty of Europe as well as the sustainability objective is something that can go along very well. But Mr. Boris, what is your perspective with regard to green transition? What is an institution like yours can do to support the green transition investment, and if you see any trade-off by the support to growth, to investment, and to support the green transition?
Yes, as a Polish Development Fund, we have set up 4 years ago the initiative called SPFR Green Hub. It consists of several instruments we have implemented. One, of course, we provide long-term financing. Sometimes this is subordinated type of financing, mezzanine and subordinate debt to close the financing structure of specific investment, and we invest mostly in solar and offshore wind farm space. What we are also doing, we are growing our private equity and venture capital platform. We focus especially on strategies connected with clean tech technologies or green technologies, and already have invested in a dozen of funds, which are pan-European or regional funds, which specialize in this area. We also do a lot of initiatives in education. Actually, we do a lot of program to develop proper skills for especially small and medium enterprises, how to go through this process of energy transition. In other institutions, such as Development Bank, we provide a lot of programs to increase energy efficiency, because this is not only the generation of energy, but there is a significant potential, especially in Poland, to increase energy efficiency in housing, in industry, in transportation. So we now are setting up electromobility fund to improve the whole supply chain and the industry in electromobility. These are key initiatives what we are doing, and I believe that we will be at the right track to go through this energy transition within the next 15 years. It required huge investments, and I fully agree with you that this is not only public capital, but we have to mobilize as much as possible private investments, and this is exactly what we are doing by venture and private equity funds. And we are not competing also with banks in financing, but trying to provide sometimes the type of capital, whether it is long-term capital or subordinated capital, to be able to close the financing structure of the projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boris. So, Minister Backes, you are a minister, you are in the ECOFIN, and so I'm sure that you are debating now what could be the best response of the European Union to the challenges that we see, and also with respect to other initiatives taken in other parts of the world. According to your experience of the debate, or your view about the future, what do you think are the most necessary initiatives that should be taken at the European level to raise the level of investment and to cope with the challenges that we have ahead of us?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think there are so many initiatives that have been taken on an EU level that perhaps are not communicated enough to at the national level. I mean, with the Repower EU, there is so much money that is being mobilized that needs to be go to where it's really necessary, needs to be implemented. And there are so many other programs also concerning research and development, the Horizon Europe program, there's Digital Europe program. There are so many programs, I think, where there has so much money has been is available, and we need to make sure that it gets to where it is needed. So I think somebody has mentioned it before, also the administrative burden that is sometimes criticized. We need to make sure that the money really gets easily to where it is most needed, so we get investments to the right sectors. Yes, we discuss, of course, a lot also at ECOFIN how best to bridge this investment gap. What is going to be the response to, you mentioned other parts of the world. I suppose you are also referring to IRA. These are difficult discussions for me. Of course, this needs to take place in dialogue with the US, but we need to see from our side, what does it mean? Are we going to react to protectionism with protectionism of our own? Is that the right solution? I doubt it. I think in the long term that is going to be more destructive. State aid, I think President Hoyer mentioned it in the beginning. We need to also here keep a level playing field. Some countries will be able to provide more of that if rules are made more flexible. So I think really Europe needs to remain open to the rest of the world. We need to see in dialogue how to remain competitive on our own end. Thanks. Maybe there is some truth also to the saying that the US invents, the Chinese implement, and the EU regulates. If we continue to go along those lines, we may not be the most competitive in the future. So I think we need to be clear on what we do. Yes, we need to support our companies with a long-term vision, and we discussed sustainable future, digital transition, the green transition, the energy transition. That's where, as President Hoyer also said, we need to put the money where our mouth is. But I would warn against falling into a protectionist trap that in the long term is not going to be good for anybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Bacchus. So we have still 14 minutes to go, and I would like to open the floor for questions to our distinguished guest. I think that there is a microphone going on within the room. Please let me know if this is true. So any volunteer for question? Yes, I see one hand, that part of the room. Please, if you can also introduce yourself.
Sure. Krishna Guheim, Vice Chairman of Evercore ISI, the US Investment Bank. Given all the needs for investment to adapt to this changing world, but also, of course, the high inflation and tight labor market conditions at the moment, how are we going to reconcile fiscal and monetary policy and make sure they're not pulling in the opposite directions?
Thank you very much. I think that Governor Hernandez could be, the good candidate to answer to this question.
Well, I can talk about monetary policy for sure. You can be sure that monetary policy will do its job in guaranteeing price stability. And of course, the advice that we are giving to ministers, if you allow me, Minister, is precisely that is a coherent fiscal policy in this very high inflation environment. And I just repeat the words I was saying in my introductory remarks. It's not that the fiscal policy cannot play a certain role in the current context. I think it's fully justified that fiscal policy tries to guarantee real incomes of most vulnerable people. That's clear, but this should be temporary, this should be targeted, this should be compatible also with creating the incentives to reduce energy consumption, for example. And the fact is that according to the different documents that have been published by the European Commission, this is not the case. So we are seeing relatively generalized fiscal impulse on which the measures that have been applied by governments have not been too much focused and too much targeted. So there is still some room. Of course, we know why this is important. No? If in the end this targeted temporary measures are not followed, and the opposite is true. So basically, the generalized fiscal impulse is applied. This will make our job, the monetary policy job, much more difficult, and this would mean for sure that the monetary policy tightening will be higher. That's the consequences of not following, let's say, this advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I saw that Mr. Boris would like to intervene on this.
If I may. So I believe that, of course, this is the challenge from the macro policy perspective, because if you look at the yield curve, is inverted, and it's indicated that actually we are heading to a recession, most likely next year, if we believe that the yield curve is right. But at the same time, as you have mentioned, we have tight labor market, which is the case in Poland, in US, maybe not in the south of Europe, so which is another challenge, that this economic situation is not the same in different part of Europe, which could give some conclusion that next year we could see still sticky inflation, so high inflation, and some economic slowdown. So I believe that the traditional monetary and policy and fiscal mix is not the right answer. I believe that in this situation, because we have faced supply side shocks, we should focus on supply side response. So we should focus more on supply side reforms, which means labor market reforms, education, skills, technology, red tape reduction, so creating better environment for the businesses. We could often simplify tax system. So these are reforms which were taken in 80s, and actually they have created a very good ground for the faster development in 90s.
Thank Thank you very much, Mr. Boris, for your perspective, but I'm sure that also Minister Backes would like to give her perspective on this very difficult topic.
Indeed, it's a difficult topic, and I think the measures, they need to go hand in hand. We are trying to reduce inflation, and we are trying to take measures that are not contrary to the ones that the central bank is taking. We are all coming from a AAA country, then we're talking about the triple T's that you mentioned, temporary, targeted, timely. Of course, that is not necessary. That's what we're trying to do, I think, in all of our countries. But if I take then the Luxembourg example, where we're trying to reduce inflation, where much of the inflation, of course, is imported, then we are not taking very targeted measures, but they are necessary in order to reduce inflation. So. This is not so easy, and sometimes rather contradictory. And if in the long term or even in the medium term we are taking measures to keep inflation down, but we are already talking about phasing out the measures that we are taking. We are risking seeing increase or explosion of inflation again down the road. So really trying to find the right balance between measures that are not unsustainably costly and leaving also some fiscal space for member countries. It's a real challenge to get all of that into the same boat, and of course measures taken in one country will have a spillover effect to the neighboring countries. That's why coordination at EU level is so absolutely indispensable. Of course, we all have to look at our own situation, and the situations across the EU and Eurozone countries are extremely different. What I call a targeted measure, the Commission will not necessarily qualify as a targeted measure. So, but coordination on an EU level is so important to try to get us out of the situation. And in a way, we've done a pretty good job, I would say, given the current circumstances, because a couple of weeks ago we were still talking about a recession, we were talking about stagflation. Now we are seeing positive signs of growth in a lot of member countries. So I would say, I hope that we have done some things right, and let's try to stay positive for the future in a very volatile and uncertain context still today. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I saw an hand in this part of the room. Microphone, please. 2 questions, so maybe we can take the 2 questions together. If the microphone can go. Okay.
Hello, I'm Ruth Pazaman from the European...
Sorry, we expected the question on the other side, but please go ahead. So we will take the 3 questions in a... No, please go ahead.
Okay, Ruth Pazaman from the European Commission, DG Employment and Social Affairs. And my question relates to the issues that you've mentioned on labor shortages, and in particular on the issue of skills. How can the EIB group support more and better investment in skills?
Okay, so this question, I think that it will be for Mariot. Maybe we can take the other 2 questions.
Thank you. Hello. Ciprian Stănescu, Social Innovation Solutions in Romania. We have a lot of questions, so I'm going to be very brief. My question is at the intersection between technology and SMEs. President Hoyer earlier mentioned the discrepancies in competitiveness between EU, US, and China. And my question is related to deep tech or cutting-edge technology, a strong focus on hydrogen. So how does the EIB group, or EIF in this case, sees the European investments in future hydrogen uses, and can it become a powerhouse at the global level, or do you think we're still not fast enough? Thank you.
Okay, I would say that these 2 questions are for Mariot, and then I see Okay, so we will go through the chair. We have the lady here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ghana for Luxembourg and EU, Belgium. Thank you so much for your enlightening panel discussion. I just wanted to ask, for third countries, we have huge debts to service, but we also have to catch up with efficient housing, green energy, vaccine production. How do we balance these two, servicing the debts at the detriment of these new innovative issues that we have to deal with? So how do we balance these two? Will the group consider anything for third countries like us servicing debts? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, but I guess that your question can be covered in the next panel where they will talk about the global response. So if you don't mind, I think that in the next panel this issue can be raised. But now I have in the first row another question. Here, the first row, please.
So I'm CEO of a French SME technology company, Rosie. We are engaged in the campaign to turn old solar modules all around Europe into high-quality raw materials to support the restart of European PV manufacturing with reduced environmental impact. So I'm very much interested in the European Tech Champion initiative mentioned by Mrs. Falkstedt. So I would like to know a little bit more about the timeline of this initiative. Does this initiative go through a optimized regulation procedure compared to many other initiatives? And how can we actually profit from this initiative? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Mariott, you have 2 minutes to answer to these 3 questions. Good luck.
Thank you. Starting with the skills, I would say here we have different ways. So, for example, the EIF has provided some student loans or guarantees for student loans in the past. But I think we are not talking about this. We are talking about the skilled labor after a certain type of professional certificate has been done. We are talking about lifelong learning. We are talking about companies having the possibility to provide training possibilities. So there are countries which are very, very far in this, and there are others who are not. Now, what can the EIB and EIF do? Of course, we can promote that companies should request more from their employees, but this is not enough. I'm very sorry, this is now a policy issue. I think what we need in order to have skilled labor, and this is the biggest problem what the companies have out there today. I mean, you were just were talking about the shortages at the labor markets. It's not only about access to labor, but access to skilled labor. And when we talk, for example, about clean tech, I mean, there are not enough students out there. We really, really need more students first, or we have to upskill the current labor force. Here we need national measures. Of course, European level measures would be great, but at least national measures in many, many regions. When we come to hydrogen, EIB has quite many products and projects, I would say, in hydrogen, very new technologies. There's a lot coming up. I think here you speak directly to, for example, to our Vice President, Thomas Östros. He can tell you what is going out there. And then about the ETCI. It's quite interesting. When we looked at the EIF portfolio from 2003 until 2015, I think, 44% of those companies in our venture capital portfolio were bought either by American or Asian partners. 44%. This shows how important this initiative is. It is not enough that we invest into the seed and startup companies. It's really important, and I'm so glad to the member states who made this happen. Now, where do we stand? The agreement between all the mandators and the EIF was signed 2 weeks ago. Our board already has approved a few projects. We are very much looking into a very strong pipeline from a number of countries, and that we can really see that this funding is going into the scaling up companies in the European Union. But the start looks very good. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mario. You managed to finish just in time, but please give me a few seconds to conclude this session. I would like to thank all the speakers who intervened and who offered us very thoughts to be reflected on what can be done. If I can pick up the main messages coming out of this session is that we have the instruments at the European Union level to compete, to be more resilient, and to mobilize the resources which are within the continent. Actually, one of our main goals at the EIB Group is also to catalyze private investment, to catalyze private capital. And, it's regulation can help, not to add additional constraints. The completion of the Capital Markets Union was mentioned, and this is a critical point, to avoid also for the enterprise not to rely too much on the banking system and to have access to other modalities of finance investment. Talked about financial integration. We talked about the role of monetary policy and fiscal policy and the way in which they interact. I like very much the word coordination, because actually in the end, the coordination of policies is what is required. So let's look at the implementation. Let's look at the way in which we can exploit all the instruments that we have, and also, to put together, if necessary, other initiatives which can boost further investment. And as a EIB group, we are ready to support all these policy initiatives. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon and evening.
Thank you indeed, Gelsomina, and of course distinguished speakers for this very energetic and insightful kickoff of the EIB Group Forum. Ladies and gentlemen, in just a very short while, so I would just ask you to bear with us, we will be joined here by His Excellency Klaus Iohannis, the President of Romania, who will be with us in just a few moments. So please bear with us, remain in your seats, and the President will be with us in just due time. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists. Once again, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much.